I want to tell you about the day my son got married and how one photograph told me everything I needed to know about the 22 years I'd spent in that family. It started the morning of the wedding when the photographer pulled me aside and said the groom's family shot would just be his mother and his biological father. And it ended 3 weeks later when I made a phone call that changed everything. But before we get there, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. I read every single one. It was a Saturday in late September, the kind of morning in Charlotte, North Carolina, where the air still smells like summer, but you can feel fall waiting just underneath it. My stepson Devin was marrying a woman named Brianna Cole at a venue out in Mint Hill, white tent, string lights, the kind of outdoor wedding that cost more than my first car. I know because I helped pay for it. I was in the bridal suite hallway tying my tie in the reflection of a framed mirror when one of the groomsmen, a young guy I didn't know well, stuck his head around the corner and said, "Hey, Mr. Whitfield, the photographer wants everyone in the family circle out front in 10 minutes. I straightened my collar, put on my jacket, walked out into the September light feeling like a man who belonged there. Because I did. Or I thought I did. Let me back up 22 years. I met my wife Patricia at a church potluck in Gastonia in the fall of 2002. She was laughing at something her friend said, holding a paper plate with a piece of cornbread on it, and her 9-year-old son Devin was standing beside her with his arms crossed, looking at the whole room like he hadn't decided yet whether any of it was worth his time. I liked that about him immediately. Kid had opinions. Patricia and Devin's father, a man named Gerald, had been separated for 2 years by then. He'd moved to Atlanta for work, he said. What he'd really moved to Atlanta for was a woman he'd met at a conference in 2000. But Patricia didn't tell me that for another year and a half, and I didn't ask. It wasn't my business yet. We dated for 8 months before I met Devin formally. Patricia was careful that way. She didn't want to introduce men to her son and then have them disappear. I respected that. When we finally had dinner together, the three of us at a Chili's on Wilkinson Boulevard, Devin ordered the same thing I ordered and didn't say a word about it. Just glanced over at my plate and then back at the menu. Changed his order. I pretended not to notice. Felt like passing a test I hadn't studied for. We got married in June 2004. Devin was 11. He came to the wedding in a rented suit 2 inches too short in the leg, and when the photographer asked him to smile, he gave this small, tight smile that wasn't quite there yet. But he stood next to me in that picture. His choice? I had 2 daughters from my first marriage, Renee and Claudette, who were with their mother in Raleigh. I paid child support, I stayed present. I drove 2 hours each way every other weekend without being asked twice. I mentioned that not to make myself sound like a saint, but because it shaped how I thought about what a father does. A father shows up. That's the whole job description, really. You show up, and you keep showing up, and eventually the kid believes you're going to keep showing up. Gerald did not operate that way. He called Devin on birthdays when he remembered, which was roughly 2 out of 3 years. He sent Christmas gifts that always arrived in January, wrapped in the store bag instead of paper. He came through Charlotte maybe twice the first year. Patricia and I were married, then once, then not at all for about 18 months. Devin never said much about it. By the time he was 12 or 13, he'd stopped mentioning his father the way you stop mentioning a door that doesn't open anymore. You know it's there. You just stop trying the handle. I drove Devin to school when Patricia had early shifts at the hospital where she worked as a floor supervisor. I sat in the bleachers at every JV basketball game, every varsity game, every playoff game where Devin went 3 for 12 from the field and played the best defense I'd ever seen a 16-year-old play. I helped him study for the SAT at the kitchen table in our house on Brookhaven Drive, the house I'd bought in 2006, and put in my name because I was the one who'd saved for the down payment, and I was the one who'd be paying the mortgage for the next 30 years. Patricia's name wasn't on the deed, not because I didn't trust her. Because my uncle, God rest him, told me once, "Raymond, a man can love a woman all the way to his grave and still be smart about what he built." I took that seriously. Devin graduated from high school in 2011 and got into NC State to study electrical engineering, partial scholarship. The rest, tuition, room and board, a used Honda Civic I bought him sophomore year when the city bus schedule stopped making sense for his internship. That was me. Patricia contributed what she could. Gerald contributed nothing, which by then was exactly what Devon expected from him. I don't say this to keep score. I said it once to Patricia in 2013, when Devon needed a new laptop and I was also dealing with a slow month at my contracting business. She looked at me like I'd said something embarrassing. Gerald does what he can, she said. Devon understands. I didn't say anything else. I wrote the check for the laptop. I let it go. Devon graduated from NC State in 2015. I drove up to Raleigh for the ceremony. Sat in the stands in the heat with the program fanning my face. When they called his name, I stood up. Clapped until my hands hurt. Took pictures on my phone that I still have in a folder labeled Devon Glad. Patricia cried. Gerald wasn't there. Devon didn't mention it. He got a job with the utilities contractor in Charlotte, moved back, worked hard, got promoted twice in 4 years. Started dating Brianna in 2019. She was a dental hygienist from Concord. Sharp and funny and good to Devon in ways that were easy to see. I liked her immediately. Patricia liked her too. Gerald met her once at some point and apparently approved, which Devon mentioned to Patricia, who mentioned it to me in a tone that suggested I was supposed to feel good about Gerald's approval. I did not feel particularly anything about it. Devon proposed to Brianna in 2021 on the Blue Ridge Parkway, which he told me about the same day he told Patricia. I wanted you both to know first, he said. I put my hand on his shoulder. I told him she was a good woman and he'd better be worth her. He laughed. That was a good afternoon. The wedding was set for September 2022. Brianna's family was from Mint Hill, so that's where they planned it. Patricia threw herself into the planning, the way she threw herself into everything, completely, with charts and binders and opinions about centerpieces. I wrote the checks Devon and Brianna couldn't cover. Venue deposit. The caterer's down payment when their first choice fell through and the backup required payment in full upfront, 30 days out. I didn't keep a running list. I just paid what needed paying and figured that's what you do for a kid you love. Gerald resurfaced about 3 months before the wedding. Devon mentioned it casually, the way you mention something you've been sitting with for a while and finally decided to say out loud. That Gerald's been calling more, he said. We were on my back porch, him with a beer and me with a glass of sweet tea. He wants to come to the wedding. Devon was looking at the yard when he said it, not at me. I said that was between Devon and Brianna, and I meant it. Patricia started talking about Gerald more after that. How he'd changed, she said. How he'd gotten himself together. How he had a good job now and his own place in Atlanta. She said it the way people say things when they're trying to normalize something they know you might have a reaction to. I nodded. I didn't have a reaction. I figured Devon was allowed to have whatever relationship he wanted with the man who raised him for 9 years before leaving. I wasn't threatened by that. Or I told myself I wasn't. The morning of the wedding, I was dressed and out on the venue grounds by 9. The ceremony wasn't until 2 in the afternoon, but there was set up to oversee and I'd promised the venue coordinator I'd be there early. I was walking the perimeter of the tent with a cup of coffee when the photographer, a woman named Sheila, mid-30s, 2 cameras around her neck, came over and introduced herself. We talked about the shortlist. Family formals, candidates during cocktail hour, the first dance, standard stuff. Then she glanced down at her clipboard and said, "For the groom's family portrait, that'll be Mrs. Whitfield and Devon's father, Gerald, correct? And then we'll do separate step-family shots after." I looked at her for a moment. "Separate shots," I said. "Yes, sir. It's on the shortlist," Patricia submitted. She turned the clipboard toward me. There it was, in Patricia's handwriting. Groom's family, Patricia plus Gerald. Step family, Russa plus girls. I took a slow breath, the kind where you feel the air move through you and come out different on the other side. "That's fine," I said. I handed her coffee cup back and walked back toward the tent. I didn't mention it to Patricia. I wanted to see the whole shape of it before I said anything. I wanted to understand what I was actually looking at. The ceremony was beautiful. I will say that fully and without any bitterness, because it was. Devon stood at the altar in a charcoal suit with his chin up and his eyes bright, the way he'd stood at every free throw line since he was 15. Like the moment owed him nothing and he didn't expect it to. Brianna walked in on her father's arm in a dress the color of winter light, and Devon's face when he saw her. That was real. Whatever else I felt that day, I held on to that. I sat in the second row with my daughters, Renee and Claudette, who'd driven down from Raleigh for the weekend. Patricia sat in the front row. Gerald sat next to her. He was bigger than I'd imagined, taller, silver at his temples. He wore a well-fitted navy suit, and he smiled at Devon from the front row like a man who'd been there for every game, every study session, every 2 a.m. phone call when Devon's car broke down on I-85 in the rain, and I was the one who drove out to get him. During the family formals, I stood where I was put. Second grouping. I smiled for the photographer. Devon came over afterward and hugged me, said, "Thank you for being here, Russ." Not Dad. Russ. Not Dad. Russ. He'd called me Dad from the time he was about 14. Then somewhere in the last few months it had quietly become Russell. Then Russ. I told myself it didn't mean anything. That's what you tell yourself. At the reception, I sat at a table with Renee and Claudette and 2 of Brianna's cousins from Concord. Nice people. I ate the salmon. I drank 2 glasses of white wine. I watched Gerald give a toast at the head table. 5 minutes about Devon's strength of character and how proud he was about the boy he raised. The room applauded. Devon smiled. Patricia dabbed her eyes. I had not been asked to give a toast. Renee put her hand on my forearm under the table. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. During the open dancing, I found Devon at the bar. He looked happy, loose, the way people look when the ceremony is over and it's finally just a party. I put my hand on his back. "Congratulations, son," I said. He turned, and there was a flicker of something. Not guilt exactly, more like awareness of something he'd been not quite looking at all day. "Thanks, Russ," he said. "Couldn't have done this without you." I nodded. I thought about the caterer's check. I thought about the Honda Civic. I thought about the SAT prep and the laptop and the late night on I-85 in the rain. I thought about sitting in bleachers in gyms in Charlotte and Gastonia and Concord, watching a kid play basketball. "Enjoy your night," I said. And I meant that too. I went back to my table. Patricia texted me at 10:30 that they were going to a late dinner with Gerald and a few of his relatives, and she'd be home by midnight. She said it the way you say something you've already decided is reasonable and aren't looking for a discussion about. I drove home alone to Brookhaven Drive, sat in the driveway for a while after the engine cut off. The neighborhood was quiet. One street light down the block had been flickering for 3 weeks, and nobody had come to fix it yet. I went inside. Made decaf, sat at the kitchen table with the light on over the stove, and thought about the photograph that didn't exist, the one with me in it, at the front, where I'd spent 22 years standing. I didn't yell. I didn't call Patricia. I sat with it until it settled from hot to heavy, and heavy to something I could name. I had 3 weeks before I did anything. I want to be clear about that, because some people will say I was rash, and I want them to understand I thought about it for 21 nights before I picked up the phone. Devon had a business. He'd started it in 2021, an independent electrical contracting company, Whitfield Electric, which he'd named after me. I'd been his co-signer on the startup business loan through Wells Fargo, $40,000. He'd been making the payments on time, and I was proud of him for that. The company was doing well. He had 2 employees and more work than he could sometimes handle. 3 weeks after the wedding, on a Monday morning, I drove to the Wells Fargo branch on South Tryon Street where I'd banked for 19 years. I asked to speak with a business lending officer about my co-signer status on an active loan. The man I met with, young guy, fresh out of some business school somewhere, nice handshake, pulled up the account, looked at the terms, looked at me. "You want to initiate a co-signer release," he said. "What do I need to do?" I said. "There's a process. Devon would need to qualify on his own, reapply under just his name. Given the company's revenue and his payment history, the loan officer thought he could. But it would take time, and in the meantime, Devon would get a formal notice that the process had been initiated. I signed the paperwork. I thanked the man for his time. I drove home on South Tryon with the windows down. Devon called me that Friday evening. His voice was careful, Not angry, not yet, but tight at the edges. I got a letter from Wells Fargo, he said. I know. Why, Russ? I let the silence sit for a moment. You named the company after me, I said. I thought about that for 3 weeks. I thought about what it means to have your name on something. He didn't say anything. At your wedding, I said, your mother submitted a shortlist to the photographer. It had a category called Groom's Family. I wasn't in that category. Gerald was. I was in a separate category called Step Family. That was Mom's. I know it was your mother's doing. And you are a grown man, and you know what was on that list, and you didn't say a word to her about it. I paused. That's not a complaint. That's just the picture. Russ, you know what you mean to me. I know what I've cost, I said. That's not the same thing. The line went quiet in a way that had some thinking in it. I'm not pulling the loan to hurt you, I said. I'm pulling it because I spent 22 years putting my name on things for this family, and nobody in this family seemed to notice whose name it was. I need you to figure out whether your company can stand on its own. I think it can. I believe in what you've built, but my name is coming off of it. He said, what am I supposed to say to that? Nothing tonight, I said. Sleep on it. We hung up. Patricia called an hour later, less careful than Devon. She had words for what I'd done. Irresponsible, vindictive, blindsiding their son when he'd just gotten married. I let her talk. When she ran down, I said, Patricia, where was I in those wedding photos? Silence. The ones the photographer took. The formal family portraits. Where was I? Russell, that's not. Did you submit that shortlist yourself? She didn't answer. That was its own kind of answer. I paid for this wedding, I said. Not all of it, but enough of it that my name deserved to be in the front row. And it wasn't. And you made sure it wasn't. I paused. You've been making sure of that for a while, I think. I just wasn't paying attention. She hung up. I slept better that night than I had in months. I don't know what that says about me. Devon and I met for coffee 2 weeks later. A Panera on Independence Boulevard. Neutral ground. His suggestion. He looked tired in the way people look when they've been having conversations they didn't know they needed to have. With Brianna. With Patricia. With himself, probably. He told me that Gerald had stopped returning his calls about 3 weeks after the wedding. He got his moment, Devon said quietly. Posted some pictures. Sent them to people in Atlanta. And then just didn't answer. I didn't say anything. I watched him work through the sentence. Mom told me you were fine with how the photos were handled, he said. That you understood. Your mother told you what made things easier for your mother. He nodded. Slow, like he was following something to its conclusion. I should have said something about the shortlist, he said. I saw it the night before. She showed it to me to approve it, and I didn't want a fight the night before my wedding. I understand that, I said. And I did. I just kept thinking. You know, Russ is secure. He doesn't need the validation. He knows what he is to me. He looked up. That was wrong. I put my comfort ahead of what you deserved. That landed somewhere specific. Behind the ribs. In the old place. Apologies don't undo it, I said. But they mean something. He nodded again. Wrapped both hands around his coffee cup like a man steadying himself. The loan is going to be okay, he said. I got approved under just my name last week. Comes with a higher rate, but I'll manage it. Good, I said. I knew you would. You did it to make me prove I could, he said. It wasn't quite a question. I did it because my name needed to mean something, I said. And because yours does too. Whitfield Electric ought to belong to a Whitfield who stood up when it counted. Now it does. We sat there for a while after that without saying much. The Panera was loud around us. Lunch crowd, kids, somebody's phone playing something too loud. Neither of us moved to leave. I have a question, Devon said finally. Go ahead. Did you ever think about leaving? Before the wedding, I mean. When things with Gerald started coming up? I thought about that. About the months I'd watched Patricia reframe the family portrait, move the pieces into a different arrangement while pretending the frame hadn't changed. I thought about what I was doing and why, I said. A man spends 22 years paying for somebody else's kid's life and calling it love. And it is love. Devin, I want you to understand that. But love doesn't mean you stop noticing what's happening. I noticed. I just kept paying anyway. I looked at him. That was partly me. I taught people I was the one who paid and didn't ask about standing. He was quiet. I'm not doing that anymore, I said. He hugged me on the sidewalk outside. A real hug, the kind you feel in your shoulders. He said, I love you, Russ. I said it back. It wasn't a reconciliation exactly. It was something newer than that and more honest. Patricia and I filed for separation in November. I'm in a condo now in South End, Charlotte. 4th floor. Windows that look out over the railroad yard and the skyline. In the evenings the light hits the buildings just right. And it's not pretty exactly, but it's interesting, which is maybe better than pretty at this point in my life. My daughters come by on weekends. Renee brought a plant she said I needed. Claudette brings food in containers labeled with heating instructions because she doesn't trust me to improvise. I let her think she's right about that. I go to a men's breakfast at my church on Thursday mornings. There's a man there named Earl Sykes, 74 years old, retired machinist, hands that look like they've done actual work in the world. He told me last month, between eggs and coffee, you know the trouble with being reliable? People start treating it like a feature of the building. Like the walls are supposed to hold up, nobody thanks the walls. I laughed at that. First real laugh in a while. Walls can come down, I said. That's right, he said. And then people remember real quick what the walls were doing. Devin texted me in December, just a few lines. Whitfield Electric had landed a commercial contract. A new medical office park out in Ballantyne. Biggest job he'd ever taken on. He said he wanted me to know. He said the name on the paperwork was all his. I sat with that for a minute before I wrote back. Good, I wrote. Go build something. These days I wake up early because I always have. I make coffee the same way I always have. 2 scoops, the cheap kind from the grocery store, because I've never been able to taste the difference no matter what anyone tells me. I sit by the window and watch the city come on. I've been thinking lately about what a man leaves behind. Not money, not even love, exactly. Something more like the record of his presence. The shape of a life lived in a specific place for specific people. Whether that shape ever got acknowledged. I spent 22 years being the walls. Solid, load-bearing, invisible. I'm not doing that anymore. And here is the thing I want you to take from this. If you take anything, the moment you stop holding up a structure that was never built to include you, you find out very quickly what was real and what was just comfortable. Some people panic when the walls come down. Some people, the ones worth keeping, they start looking around and saying, wait, I didn't know. I should have known. Those are the people you build something new with if you're willing. And some of it, the part that's just yours, you build alone, by the window, in the early light. That's enough. That's more than enough. Thank you for listening, and if the story touched something you've been carrying, leave it in the comments. I read every word. This is Voices of Uncle Russell, and I'll see you next time. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the wedding itself, not the photograph that didn't include me, but the morning after. Sitting at the kitchen table on Brookhaven Drive with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, thinking, how did I let this go on so long? That question isn't self-pity. It's something harder than that. It's accountability. I spent 22 years being the kind of man who showed up without being asked, paid without keeping score, stayed quiet when things felt wrong, because I told myself that's what a steady man does. He doesn't make it about himself. He just holds. But here's what I didn't understand then, and what Devin's wedding finally forced me to see. There's a difference between being a man of character and being a man who's trained the people around him to expect his sacrifice without ever having to name it or honor it. I taught Patricia and Devin without meaning to that my presence was a given, that Russell would handle it, that the walls hold themselves up. And when you teach people that, you can't be entirely surprised when they stop noticing the walls. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with, honestly. Not Gerald's toast, not the short list. My own role in building a situation where those things were even possible. What I had to reckon with. What any person has to reckon with when they reach the end of something like this is whether the choices you made came from a genuinely good place or from a place that was hiding something? Was I paying Devon's tuition because I loved him or because I needed to be needed? Both things can be true at the same time. A man can love completely and still be afraid to ask for what he's worth. That fear doesn't make the love less real, but it does make it easier for other people to take advantage of, whether they mean to or not. Devon wasn't a villain. He was a person who took the path of least resistance at a moment that mattered. Patricia wasn't evil. She was selfish, and she let her selfishness wear the mask of family logistics. Gerald was exactly what he'd always been. A man who showed up for the photograph and disappeared before the work started. None of them were mysteries. I just kept choosing not to read them clearly, because reading them clearly would have required me to act, and acting would have meant disrupting a life I'd spent 22 years building. The disruption came anyway. It always does. What I know now, standing on the other side of it, is this. The kind of man worth being isn't the man who never breaks. It's the man who knows what he stands for, and holds that line even when it costs him something. It cost me a marriage and a family arrangement I'd put everything into. It cost Devon a co-signer and Patricia a story she told herself for years. But it also gave Devon the chance to find out his company could carry its own name. It gave me back mine. I think about the morning I drove to the Wells Fargo branch on South Tryon and signed those release papers with a steady hand. I wasn't angry in that moment. I was clear. There is a version of strength that looks like noise. Raised voices, accusations, doors slammed, and then there is this quieter version, the kind that knows exactly what it is and what it's worth, and simply stops pretending otherwise. Devon is building something real now. I believe that. And I am building something real now too. Smaller, quieter, but entirely mine. That's not a consolation. That's the whole point.